Here for something like that. It's pretty good. All right, I'm on. Tracy, I'm on. I can hear myself now. All right, welcome in. Sunday morning at 9. I've been up a few hours, but I'm still trying to wake up. So I don't come in with as much energy as Samlin does. So, and by the end of class, I'll probably maybe be close to where he starts. So we'll see. Sorry about that. Good to have y'all. Mac's been teaching in here for a while on the story of the Spirit in the Bible. So some of y'all have been here for that and got to hear him teach through that. This morning, I am starting a class that's going to run through the summer that I'm excited for. I'll give you some context on. But this class is going to be covering the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel in the Old Testament. And maybe not 2nd Samuel. I don't know if we'll get there. So we may just spend all of our time in 1st Samuel and try to make our way towards 2nd Samuel. But I think there's enough in 1st Samuel that we may not make it to 2nd Samuel very well. Just to give you all some background on how I chose this subject, and this might give you all some grace for me as a teacher too, and some of these things that I'll admit here. But one thing was when we chose our theme for the year, this is our story. We're actually planning to carry that into, I think the plan tentatively is carry the theme into 2027, and then in the fall of 27, introduce a new theme. So that instead of following the calendar year, we're going to follow the academic year and make that shift. So that's not been fully decided, but we may carry this theme on for about a year and a half, just a heads up on that. But as we were talking about that, one of the suggestions was we could kind of, not perfectly, but kind of start with the Old Testament for a little while and then work our way into the New Testament. So maybe for the first half of this year or more, spend some time in the Old Testament and then work our way toward the New. So that was part of why I was thinking of an Old Testament book. Also, and here's my admission that may hopefully gives you some grace for me. I am not an Old Testament scholar. Okay, y'all know that about me. That's one of the reasons I love Ben's classes so much, because Ben teaches the Old Testament so well, and he knows it so well. And I love learning from Ben and all of the connections that he makes in the Old Testament. But I was thinking, I really love Samuel. I've been reading Samuel on my own. The stories are just beautiful and really interesting. And I thought, how could I learn the Old Testament better? I could teach the Old Testament. That would be good. So it may sound a little strange to say the teacher wants to learn the Old Testament better, so he's going to teach it. You would think I should already know it before I start teaching it, but that's kind of my aim here is for myself to learn something. Those of you who teach know you never learn something as well as when you actually teach it. When you have to teach it, you learn it better. And so I hope that happens in me through this study and maybe also through you. But my plan is just to open up God's Word together in 1 Samuel. Today we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 1. And next week, planning to look at Hannah's prayer or Hannah's song in chapter 2. And so just kind of walk through the text together, read, notice some things, and enjoy God's Word together. And so I hope that you'll contribute to this and have your Bibles and follow along and make comments. And if you ask questions, maybe Carol can answer those, or one of our elders like Don Sandlin or etc. So, but the first thing I actually want to do as you turn to 1 Samuel is I want to pass a handout out that I've made. I'll try to get y'all some handouts because it helps me to have something to say, and for y'all to have something to kind of hang your hat on. And I'll kind of make a first pass and then come back and give y'all some extras that I have.
You could do that, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's see here. I think I've just about got this side. I may have a few. I should have plenty for everybody to have one, so don't feel like you have to share if you don't want to. Morning, Stephen. How are you doing? Good, good. You are too, thank you. Excited about small group. Y'all coming over, all right? That's good. So this is a handout that I put together based on, a biblical scholars here that can help us. Oh, Jeff just walked back out. Come on, Jeff. I need you. All right. We're in 1 Samuel, and we have a handout too. So did anybody not get one over here? Raise your hand. There's an extra. Okay. Let me bring that over to Jeff. All right. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, Matthew. Good to see you.
Yeah. Is it good to be known by name this morning? Called out by name? Oh, all right. Thank you. All right. And, okay, so this is a handout that I put together this week just to try to locate 1 Samuel in the Bible. And I know y'all know, can find it there in the Old Testament, but just to give us some context of where it is in the Old Testament and in Scripture. So some kind of identifying markers here. So you may know that the Jewish Bible is organized differently than the Christian Bible, or categorized slightly differently than the Christian Bible. Thank you. And so for Jews, there's typically three divisions of types of genre, type of book in the Old Testament that follow the Tanakh acronym. And so you've got the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, and the writings. And those are the three major groupings of the biblical books. So you've got Torah there with the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And then prophets, which is a little more expansive of a category than what we're typically used to, with the former and the latter prophets and the minor prophets. And so you see there that Samuel is considered a book of one of the former prophets in the Jewish way of thinking. And that may not surprise us too much, since Samuel is himself a prophet. In the Christian Bible, you see, I think there's typically 4 divisions here. Pentateuch, or law, same 5 there. But then you've got historical books. So we tend to think of Samuel as a book of history more than a book of one of the prophets. And I think sometimes how we frame a book may help us or hinder us from appreciating things in it. So in a Christian kind of division there, we've got Pentateuch, historical, poetic, and then prophets, major and minor. And so those are all listed out for you there. It is kind of strange, I think, that Daniel is often considered a major prophet. He's a bit of an outlier, but tends to fall in there with Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. There's different ways of constructing the biblical overview or overarching plot. And so here's one that actually, Jeff, forgive me, I followed N.T. Wright on this. He's got 5 acts, kind of like a Shakespearean play, 5 acts. Creation, fall, which apparently Act 2 is pretty short. So, but you do have creation and then fall, and then you've got Israel, which would include a whole lot of things there, including the call of Abraham and the Exodus and the, what we're going to be talking about in Samuel, and exile and all of this stuff for Israel. But then in the New Testament, you have Jesus, who comes as the fulfillment of God's creation in Israel. And then today we're in Act 5, church and toward new creation. But one of the things that we'll see in Samuel that I think is helpful for us, Samuel follows Judges and Ruth. And so the people of Israel are moving from this more tribal society to more nationalistic, or from tribes ruled by judges to a kingdom ruled by a king or kings. So that's one of the major kind of historical shifts that's happening there that we see in Samuel itself, is that move from tribes ruled by judges to monarchical society ruled by kings. So there within the narrative, you've got some approximate dates for what's going on in the story of Samuel that may be helpful to you just to get your chronology right. So this is around the year 1000 BC, before Christ or before the Common Era. The C in front of that just means approximately. And so you've got Saul's reign of about 22 years, Ishbosheth's reign that's kind of within David's reign there, and Saul's from 106 to 104. David who reigns for 40 years, and then Solomon who reigns for 40 years. And Solomon kind of spills into 1 Kings there after Samuel, but specifically Saul and David's reign, you see the timeline on that. Looking at the content of Samuel, 3 major divisions of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Again, I hope this is helpful to y'all. It's helpful to me just to get oriented on, what's chapter 1 doing and what's kind of the pieces here of 1st and 2nd Samuel, because you can get lost in the chapters and the subheadings and all the characters. But you kind of think of it in 3 parts that overlap, of course, between the rule of the house of Eli, which we'll be in for the next few weeks, there in the priest in Shiloh. And then you've got the reign of King Saul from about chapter 8 to the end of 1 Samuel. And of course, that David's narrative overlaps a lot with King Saul's narrative. But his reign is from chapter 8 to the end of 1 Samuel. And then essentially all of 2 Samuel is David's reign. It does get messy, of course, but kind of the focus is on David and his kingship. And then I put down here some questions to keep in mind as we read 1 Samuel. And I'll just throw these out there. Sorry about that. I'll throw these out there for you to be chewing on as we read this, because I think these can be helpful to us in appreciating what's going on in the text. One thing is this issue of what all in the story is said and what is not said. And when I read these stories, I like to read them as, well, they're scripture, of course, but also as literature, right? They're narrative and literature. And one of the things that makes these stories so powerful is how they're constructed and what we might say the economy of language of the stories. And that is that when you think about even, 1st and 2nd Samuel are, 50 so chapters. I guess I could do the math on that, but it's not a very long story, is it? I mean, how many of y'all have read War and Peace or Brothers Karamazov or Harry Potter, right? I mean, these are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and we have 1st and 2nd Samuel that covers decades and decades. That's like 50 pages in our Bibles, and we don't get a lot. And yet I think that's part of us may think, and I do often, we may think, I wish we had more information. But I think part of the power of these stories is that they are so limited. They tell us enough, but they leave us wondering what's really going on there. And, what did that look like? Or why did the narrator say it that way and didn't kind of go and try to exhaustively describe what was going on? So we call that, I think I picked this up from Robert Alter, who has a couple of books, The Art of Biblical Narrative, The Art of Biblical Poetry. But he talks about reticence of speech and how it's actually a literary device that you say enough, but you don't say too much. And in not saying too much, you as a reader are left wondering, asking questions and engaging with it and filling in the gaps and thinking, now what was going on here? And what did that actually look like? And we do that with all of the Bible, the Gospels and other places that we wish we had more information. But I think that kind of, we wish we had more information is actually one of the effects of this literary device, is not telling us too much where we're like, please, no more information. When my brother read the book, I have not read Moby Dick, but when he read Moby Dick, he said, you could really tell they didn't have TV back then because they really got into all the information about whales and stuff. And it's like too much information. And so, no, the Bible doesn't leave us feeling that way. It leaves us thinking, we wish we had more information, and that's actually one of its devices. All right, number 2 is the question, how is the monarchy viewed? That is Saul and David. And I think most of us will think, maybe at first, Israel asks for a king like other nations, and God kind of begrudgingly gives them that king in Saul. But you have kind of conflicting accounts, do you not? Even in Saul's life, where the kingship is viewed positively and as a good thing, and then at other times it's not. And of course, with David, it seems to be more positively. We think of David as being a great king, and then Christ coming and kind of being a king like David forever. And so that being a very positive thing. But just wrestle with that some as we go through the story, is how is the kingship viewed? It's not all good and it's not all bad. It's actually a mixture of these things. And then number 3, this one is relevant for all of Scripture, but how is it that a holy God interacts with unholy people, uses broken systems and corrupt leaders? And boy, we still see this today, do we not, in the church, of how God is yoked to us. And even with all of our sin and shortcoming, God says, I will be your God and you will be my people. And we're in this together. And we're yoked to Christ, Christ yoked to us. But in Samuel, how does God use broken systems? We'll actually see that this morning in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Unholy people, whether that's humanity in general, whether that's the nation of Israel or leaders and so on. And then the great question that we as Christians ought to be asking when we read our Old Testaments is, how do these stories anticipate Christ? How do they point us forward to Christ, who is the fulfillment of Israel and Israel's hope? All right, so I hope that's helpful to you. I'll plan to have more handouts in the future. If you didn't get one, they'll be up here, and you can grab one of those for your own study. Like I said, that's a compilation of a couple of commentaries stuff, so that's why the chapters and such may not line up just perfectly. All right, so we're in 1 Samuel. I want to open to 1 Samuel chapter 1, and as I said, I really want to read through this and talk about it together. Kind of unpretentiously just read through and make some comments on it. So I'll read some. I may even invite some of y'all to read too if you're willing to do that. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. And my hope is that we'll get to the end of the chapter 1 this morning. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, let's just pause on that for a minute. Who does the story focus on at this point? What are the names that we see here? Be audience participation. Yes? Yeah, Peninnah and Hannah. And also, what's the name of their husband? Elkanah, yes. So, some names to work out, and it's kind of confusing too when you jump into a book and you've got a list of like 10 names, and you're thinking, now which of these were we reading about exactly? So they're in the hill country of Ramathaim Zophim, which they think that word means something like there were some like hills and maybe some like watchtowers at some time. So that's kind of a cool history to think about, like an area that had hills and watch posts to guard the kingdom or whatever. So that's where they're at. And we have Elkanah, and he's got 2 wives. Now, that for us today, polygamy is something that we may, wonder about a little bit, right? And think, 2 wives. Is this a good situation, do you think, having 2 wives? Yeah, that may be the most participation I get this morning. Probably not ideal, and certainly not once we come to the New Testament. Jesus, I think, makes clear that, going back to creation, Adam, Eve, one man, one woman, but it becomes the custom or maybe part of their culture of that day that they did have often more than one wife. We see that in many places. We'll see that with David, right? David has several wives. Also the practice of having concubines and such beyond the spouse. So it's an interesting culture where we realize we're kind of thrown into another world here other than our own, and it's good for us to just sit with that a little bit. It's also interesting to me where this story begins. Once you come to, now this is going to be a really easy question. So I'll see who I can call on for this easy question here. Grayson, once we get to the book of Kings, who does the story focus on in Kings? Well, yes. More generally, you're too smart. I call on someone too smart. The kings, right? It's focused on kings. And who do we focus on here in this as we start Samuel? It's on this family, right? This humble family that's not a king and even, going to give birth not to Saul or to David, but to Samuel. And here is this just faithful family in this hill country that is a worshipful family that the narrative begins with. And I think that that's just a reminder to us that God's story often begins in simple places, in common places, in humble places, and not just in the palaces of kings and the uber rich, but even among ordinary people. And so that's where the story begins. There is conflict that's introduced here beyond just a man with two wives. What is the conflict that we see? Every good story has conflict. So there's already conflict that's been suggested. Something is not right. Children, that's right. So one of these women has children. One of them does not have children. And you can already begin to anticipate what would that, part of the I guess polygamy would have various issues connected to it. But one of those is the way, if you have one man and multiple women, that just the kind of level of abuse that the women might endure, right? And the kind of the competition, the kind of brokenness of those relationships. I was reading a book a few years ago about a certain, would you say, Christian, I don't know if I'd say denomination, a Christian group where polygamy is practiced, at least in very fundamental circles of that group. I'm not trying to point fingers at a particular group, even though I don't care for this particular group. And just kind of some of the stories that came out of those environments where you had multiple wives, and how much kind of hurt and just brokenness that encourages by having systems like that. So anyway, I digress. But yeah, you've got two wives, and there's not equality here. Because you've got Hannah, who has no children, Peninnah, who does have children, who's able to bear children. In this day and age, being able to bear children was pretty huge. I mean, I know still is today, certainly. But especially back in this culture, it was the expectation of the obligation or the duty or the function of a wife was to be able to bear children to the family. And children were sources of income, but they were also kind of your retirement plan of like when we get old, I know some of us are already thinking about that with our own children. I tell Shiloh all the time, now when I get old, you're going to have to take care of me and bathe me. And she don't like hearing that right now, so I probably should ease up off that a little bit. She don't like thinking about me being old. But I tell her I'm already old, but she's like, you're not old. So that's nice. But she don't like me talking about getting old. But she's going to be the one taking care of me. Surely not my boys. They're not going to be doing it unless they change and shape up here in the next 15 years or so. But anyway, but yeah, you had children. They were your security, right? I mean, they were your economy. They helped work and provide money, and but also just they would carry on your name. They would get your inheritance when you died. I mean, someone to give your inheritance to. But also in your old age, they would be there to take care of you. So it was this, and still is today, but I think even in some ways more so, just this huge thing, like the elephant in the room, if you did not have children or were able to bear those. Can you think of other stories? This is almost a theme in the Old Testament where you have barrenness, or you even like multiple wives and one of them being barren. Can you think of any examples of this? Yeah, Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Good. Okay. Abraham, right, with Sarah and Hagar in that situation. Now, Hagar wasn't a wife, but a servant, or something like a concubine, I guess, but not a wife, but still. And you remember when that's the one that I think about, even though they weren't married. But once Hagar has Ishmael, what does that do to the relationship with Sarah and Hagar? Yeah, she hates her. And at first, Sarah thought it was a good idea, it seems like in the text. It's one of those reticences where you're like, what was really going on there? But thought it was a good idea. But then once Hagar had children, kind of held that over Sarah. And then there was friction, and then Hagar got sent away and then come back. That's another story for another day. But yeah, where there's one wife who has a child and one that doesn't, then that kind of exacerbates that inequality, and can be used. Now, sinful, broken people who will hold things over others, right, in a relationship, a way to get ahead or to think of myself as better than. We do that still today with all kinds of things. The reason I'm better than you is because of this that I have that you don't have. And anyway, so when you have this family system in such close proximity, Peninnah who has children, Hannah who does not only is that just in and of itself certainly difficult for Hannah, but it's even more so if Peninnah chooses to kind of make that obvious that, hey, look what I can do, look what you can't do, kind of thing. All right, so that's the setup of the whole story, is in the first two verses that we get Elkanah, two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, and Hannah has no children. All right, verse 3, now this man, Elkanah, used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. And on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. And so it went on, year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. And therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? And am I not more to you than 10 sons? So we'll pause there from verse 3 to verse 8. I think Elkanah meant well when he said that, but I'm not sure I would have said that, right? Am I not worth more to you than 10? Maddie, does that sound like a nice thing to say to a wife if she can't bear children? Am I not worth more than 10 sons to you? Okay. Probably not. Yeah, so, but backing up to verse 3, this is they're a faithful family. They go up to the house of the Lord, which is at this time, it's called later the temple, which is not the temple, of course, but it's at Shiloh. So you have the house of the Lord at Shiloh. So this is before the days it finds its way to Jerusalem. But there Eli is the priest with his 2 sons at Shiloh. And his family goes up year by year to worship the Lord of hosts there. The sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. One thing that I learned in reading up on this a little bit was that Hophni and Phinehas are Egyptian names, which is really interesting to think about because they're the priests of the Lord. And we learn later, and we'll talk about probably in 2 weeks, how kind of broken this family is and how terrible of priests that they were. We'll see some of Eli's own incompetence here in chapter 1. But the fact that their names are Egyptian in origin and not, Jewish, it's interesting to think of the way that they might have been compromised in some way in their loyalty to the God of Israel. So the sons, so Eli is the priest, but the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, are also the priests. So we see another pair, and I think Eli does have 2 children, but it's interesting. We have Elkanah with 2 wives. We have Eli with 2 sons, and so maybe another one of those kind of devices we might say that Samuel likes to use. We have another pairing now of siblings, not of wives. So they're priests of the Lord, and on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions. So when you sacrifice, you've got some there to celebrate with, and give some to Peninnah, but he also, and to all of her family, sons and daughters, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Now, what kind of, what does that seem to communicate about Elkanah? What does it make you think if he's given Hannah a double portion? Okay, he's not helping the problem between the wives. Okay. But Hannah does seem to be his favorite. The Old Testament and maybe the Bible in general is not as weird about favorites. Favoring one son over another, or the older, over the younger, that kind of thing. So it seems pretty clear that Elkanah's got a favorite here, or maybe just in some ways that he, loves Hannah, maybe shows pity to Hannah, right? I'm going to use the word reticence about 1,000 times apparently in this class, but it does make you wonder, is it, what was it there? Was there some bond and some connection of some really loving, kind of going back to Jacob and Leah and Rachel, right? Which one was Jacob's favorite, we might say? Rachel was, right? Even though Rachel had trouble bearing children at first. And so Jacob loved Rachel. And I think that kind of carries through even his marriages to Leah and there's 2 others, but I forget their names. But he loved Rachel more. And so you think, well, if we have that Genesis story in the back of our mind, we might think, well, maybe Elkanah loves Hannah more, or is it just pity? Maybe is it pity, like charity? Of you feel bad for this person, you see the inequality here between Peninnah and Hannah, and so he's going to try to help even the score a little bit by treating her a little bit nicer. Which do you think it is? Any thoughts on that? Does it seem clear? Yeah.
I think he cares more for her because of his statement about he more than 10 sons. So
Okay.
that seems to imply that he has a special feeling for her. It doesn't come right out and say it. It seems to imply.
Okay. Seems to imply that he has a special feeling for her, or maybe she ought to have a special feeling for him. Maybe he's a little high on himself. Say, I'm a pretty good guy. What?
He's the patriarch.
Uh,
Did you find
okay.
in those Old Testament, the older men often
Yeah.
had kind of a little,
Chip on their shoulder.
no, the opposite. They
Oh.
felt that, like the children should die for them and them for their children.
Oh,
that
yeah.
type of thing.
Okay, yeah. Arrows pointing this way to this guy. This guy. Yeah, yeah, under.
Like it's not, like his gifts aren't good enough because it's not making her happy. Say, I'm
Okay.
giving you more than what 10 sons could give you. So why have I given you all this and you're still sad?
Okay. Yeah, maybe there's frustration there of, that does make me think a little bit about marriage of like, sometimes you try to do something nice. You're like, didn't that solve all the problems? And it's like, no, actually it didn't solve all the problems. Thank you. So yeah, yes, sir.
Verse 7, man, we got to dumb it down for me, but it says there that, is there, what was the lady's,
Penina. Mm-hmm.
She done this at church.
Yes. Yep.
You ever had any bad words said to you at church that it just sticks with you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you drew that out. Now, your Paige's dad.
Yeah,
But no, that's okay. I just forget your name. What's your name?
hey, that's the mother.
Okay. All right. And what's your name?
Stan.
Stan. Okay. Well, glad to have you all today. And that's one thing I wanted to point out here is church as a place where we're reminded of some of the things that are most painful to us, right? And, here we have year by year. So not only is Hannah going here year by year and praying for this, but you also, for whatever reason, Penina finds this as the opportunity. We're told in the text, like, if I'm going to try to aggravate Hannah, I'm going to wait till we get to Shiloh and let her have it when we go down and try to worship God. And the kind of fighting at church, we may say, if we're applying that to today, or just, Hannah's praying for this thing, the thing of all things in her life, it seems to be, to get a child. Apparently, Penina's got several, and Hannah just says, give me just one. And year by year, she's doing this. And so year by year, in going to church, so to speak, she's reminded of what God has not done for her, right? And still showing up to worship, even though worship becomes this place of pain and remembrance of how God has not answered prayer. Maybe that relates to some of us in the room today too, of something that you've been praying for, whether it's healing, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, whether it's forgiveness, whatever it is, and feeling like week by week, year by year, that thing is still not there. God's not giving you that. So Hannah really, I think she models this resilience, right? Wouldn't it be easier in some ways not to show up? If God's not going to do for me what I think God ought to do, or even to your point, Stan, if others at worship are going to mistreat me, why would I want to be there? If I'm not going to be treated right, then I'll just stay home. But no, she goes year by year, even into the pain of that situation. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure when the custom began of your family choosing your mate, but it was very much going by the time of Christ. And so she could have been she could have been chosen by the family, and then Hannah may have been the choice of her husband. So that would, one of the things that John the Baptist was preaching and teaching, and one of his missions was to turn men to love their children and teaching them to love their wives. Many times there wasn't a great deal of love between a husband and wife because she was chosen by the family at birth, basically almost at birth.
Yeah, that's one of the things you some of that cultural stuff, or I hate to use the word political stuff because I don't mean like right and left. I just mean like how within the system, within the society, with the advantages of marriage and what one, connection here can do for me and us versus the other. It does offend some of our modern sensibilities that love is not the kind of the thing that brings us together, and especially in the Old Testament world, it was often more practical than that. And that's, I think, part of too why the children became so why the children were so important, because if the marriage wasn't primarily about an infatuation between two adults that with or without children, we love each other, and it was more of, there's a greater sense maybe of like utility, of like we are in this for the sake of having children and surviving and all of this, then in that kind of context, not having children's a bigger deal, because it's like, this is what we signed on for. And but yeah, maybe it was that Hannah was a choice of her husband's. And so I don't know, we may never know that, but that's a great, wondering. David, do you have something?
Yeah, I think you see all through the Old Testament how God chose the humble and the lowly, the
Yeah.
things that man thought were that way, but he exalted.
Yeah.
And that's always carried on into the New Testament. When we exalt ourselves, God will humble us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fact that humble nature God looks at
Right.
and know that they trust in Him.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, God is exalted, and they are
Yeah.
exalted.
Yeah. Well, and it also, stories like this remind me that the way that God's story in Scripture and in the world moves forward is through the providence of God and what God does. And God uses natural means all the time, kind of ordinary things. But for Samuel to be born, God is going to have to open Hannah's womb and allow her to have a child. And so it's like, yeah, God has to show up and perform a miracle if this story is going to get off the ground. And that's exactly what He does, right? It's not just about, this guy and this girl got together and they had this child and this child had that child and this child went on and did that. No, God is active in the story and bringing the story, keeping it moving forward to His plan. So, yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you see that in Mary and Elizabeth, where
Mm-hmm.
she was barren and
Yes.
John the Baptist. That story.
Yes. Well, and next week, hopefully, when we only got to 8 verses today, so that's great. But if we get to Hannah's prayer, we will look at Mary's song, because there's a lot of overlap. And I think Luke uses some of uses Samuel some. He uses the Old Testament a lot, but Samuel specifically to kind of guide the way that he tells his story. So, yeah, Justin. Thank you.
The Rachel and Leah situation.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob loved Rachel more. Wanted to marry her first, but also whenever he's allowing Leah to have children, he did that because he saw that she was unloved. And so
Right.
the gist is Rachel may have been barren for a while, and Leah had kids because Rachel was the one that was more loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hope was that Leah could give kids to Jacob. Maybe Jacob would, be the husband he should have been. And it may be the same situation here. Hannah was the one that was more loved. And so God closed her womb and gave children to, I can't remember her name,
Yeah.
the other wife.
Yeah.
So that they could balance things out.
Yeah.
But also, just looking at the grand scheme of God's plan here in this story, Hophni and Phinehas are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And he had already decided that he wasn't going to let the stewardship of that family of Levites continue on. The only way he was going to be able to get Samuel into that situation to take over for Eli when he died and killing Hophni and Phinehas is if we have the situation with Hannah being, willing to dedicate her son to him because she was so excited that she finally had a kid.
Wow, that's great. How God's working in all of that. One thing that you said as we close that I'll draw out too is I think it's tempting to read some of these stories looking for the good guys and the bad guys, and maybe they're even presented some in that way of like, we're on Hannah's team, and Penina is, she's a loser, and I don't think that's the right way to read the story. God cares for all of these people, right? And in different ways. So I think to Justin's point there with Leah, it's why God blesses her in that way versus Rachel in this way. But God is looking to work in each of our lives in the ways that each of us needs him to work in our lives. And sometimes that's by opening doors. Sometimes that's by closing doors. Sometimes that's by blessing us or by withholding blessing. But God is working in each of our lives the way that each of us needs that. So thank you all for your participation today, and looking forward to this. We'll pick up in verse 9 of chapter 1 next week. At this pace, we will not make it to 2 Samuel. I'm already seeing that.